Okay, man, is there a video for that or something? Yeah, I mean the spacecraft is launching. SpaceX. Friday 2 a.m. Yeah, Friday. Yeah, that'd be great. So a really interesting topic. We have a main session at 4:30 here, but I think we're running a little bit late. So let me just tell you that it's kind of an informal break for a few minutes. I think I have to figure out what the timing is in the other hall, and they'll reconnect. But we have a VC panel, kind of what investors are thinking about the maker area. And are they back there? They are. Okay, let me see. Okay, excuse. So let's not completely break. Hey, Mason, are you still back there? I just thought maybe we'll take a few questions for Mason if I can get him back out here. Yeah, no doubt. Down in the lunchroom, the cafeteria, was that the straw bees with little electronics things. I think that's fascinating to make stuff that's interactive with. You make almost any kind of structure and make it interactive. I saw Eric in Oslo, Norway in January with straw bees, and they asked me to name Maker of the Year for them, and he was the guy there. Came from Sweden, and he came to Maker Faire Bay Area and here, and that's the first time I saw the electronics that they added to this. So I think that's really cool. So I just we have a few minutes here. We get some questions here from you, and is that throw that? Anybody? Any questions about space?
How far along is the project used water?
Well, we've actually built a prototype of the propulsion system, so a tank and valves and a rocket engine, all that kind of stuff. We fired it a number of times. It's so safe we can fire it indoors, which is cool. It'll pop out of it, that's it. So yeah, we built it, we tried it. It seems to work. We actually put it in a vacuum chamber too to measure its vacuum performance, which is important.
All right, I have a question for you. Why isn't that at Maker Faire?
Maybe next year.
Okay, I'd love to see that. Another question in the back there.
So, right, a lot of NASA-funded work is, I wouldn't say public domain, but you can get it, right? It's not classified or anything like that. There's a number of places to go to do that. You can go to technology.nasa.gov, and there's a number of things listed at that site. There's also code.nasa.gov. A lot of the software that NASA has created is available for the public, and you can download it right there. The images, yes. I think what they ask is that you say image courtesy of NASA. Same thing with videos.
But I guess a question, and it might be, I know you don't work for NASA, and Sam does, but is there like an open hardware kind of policy or anything around that? Like you're talking about like a 3D design of something, or even just the documentation for how something works.
Anything that we, NASA, would ever create our own by ourselves is it's the nation's space program, so the nation owns it.
Right.
It's just a matter of if you know about it, you can request it from NASA and that's provided. If it's provided by a contractor to us under contract, the IP will generally belong to the contractor.
Okay.
If anything is NASA created, it's open source, it's available. So we're developing a website currently to categorize and catalog all of our patents so that people can get into there and can see what NASA has and be able to take advantage of that, especially as we go public space exploration.
So if you know the GitHub site, if you've heard of GitHub, right? So all of the sprite design is on there. All the circuit board layouts, the EagleCAD files, you can build a sprite from what's on that website. All the software is there, and what that means is that, in fact, we've had 2 people now build them who are not at all affiliated with Cornell. They just built them off the GitHub site. So you can go ahead and download that stuff at least if you want.
Yeah. The sprites we saw at MakerCon in the Bay Area, and it's fascinating how small they are, and they really just are being ejected from that like a cartridge.
Yeah, they use a trick that cell phones use to keep from their communications from colliding. It's called CDMA, code division multiple access. Using one frequency, we can have thousands of these things all talking at the same time, which is kind of cool.
Okay. Well, one more. Okay.
You mentioned possibly landing one on an asteroid, but what you were talking about, it didn't sound like there was really a navigational control of these things as of yet. Is that correct?
It's a great question. So the question, if you didn't hear, was could you land one on an asteroid and if it doesn't have navigation control, how could you do that? I would call it more stopping at an asteroid than landing. But that's actually part of the deal. These things are so disposable, let's say, that what if only 1 out of 1,000 actually survived an impact with a surface like that? That might be enough. So you maybe roll the dice and take your chances. There's more to say. Catch me afterward.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Mason, thank you very much for coming back out. I appreciate it. Can I just recommend, if you don't mind, if you're on the aisle and could move in a couple seats and free up. And if you're just coming in, if you also go over to this other side and come down, there's lots of seats up front here that you're welcome to have. And so we're going to do a full session here, and then we go outside for beer and prototypes. And so, okay. So let me introduce Eric Klein, who gave a nice session in the other hall, and he will be where is it? Organizing this panel of VCs. We have Eric and we have Will Porteous, who's a general partner and CEO of RRE, and Zack Schildhorn, partner at Lux Capital. Thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over to you. You're all mic'd, right?
We're mic'd.
Yeah. Well, you can give him a hand to start. Yeah, let's go.
I'm not sure we deserve it yet. Let's see if we can prove our worth. So, folks, we're all that's stopping you from seeing some amazing technology and enjoying a wonderful evening and a movie. But hopefully, we can again provide some value to you. I'm actually really excited. I have the privilege of getting to work with a lot of hardware startups. But I also get the privilege to work with some great venture capitalists. And today, in all seriousness, we've got two of the best firms, two great folks here. So you're going to have the opportunity a little bit later on to ask some questions, frank, open questions about the intersection of hardware and solutions and venture capital. So let me go ahead and let these two distinguished gentlemen introduce themselves, and I'm going to dive into some questions. So you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'm Will Porteous. I'm a general partner and the chief operating officer of RRE Ventures. We're an early stage technology investor based here in New York. We've been here in New York for 20 years. Our active portfolio in the New York area comprises about 60 companies today across a variety of technology sectors. Some names you might be familiar with in the current portfolio are companies like BuzzFeed and Quirky, Normal, that is Normal Ears, for those of you who know the company, Souls. And in general, on the maker side and on the hardware side of things, we were founding investors in companies like Drobo, the pioneering storage systems business, Whiptail, the flash storage array company that Cisco acquired last year. And along with my partners, Jim Robinson IV and Eric Weeson, I spend a lot of time in these sectors. Thanks for having me.
I'm Zack. I'm a partner at Lux Capital. We're a venture firm headquartered here in New York, currently investing out of a $250 million fund. And whereas a lot of the venture industry chases hot topics, sectors that are sexy at the time, we do very little of that. We end up focusing on a lot of opportunities that are almost a little more science fiction-esque. And our companies are doing everything from nuclear waste cleanup to surgical robotics, 3D printing and scanning, launching satellites, new satellite antennas. We tend to skew early in that we invest at the earliest stages of a company's life and sometimes help form companies from scratch. Some of the businesses we're invested in you might be familiar with are Shapeways here in New York, Souls Systems, that's 3D printing orthotics and insoles, Matterport, which turns indoor spaces into 3D models instantaneously, Planet Labs, which may have been mentioned in the prior talk, launching Earth imaging satellites. So a lot of very cool companies, and I feel very lucky to do what I do and to be here today. So thanks for having us.
Good. So both of you understand hardware. You've invested in hardware. Let's go back to the word on the page there. MakerCon. Make. What does make mean to you as a venture capitalist?
From my standpoint, it's a broad term that really captures the work of anyone who's taking a cross-discipline approach to creating a product or solving a problem, and typically bringing a lot of sort of practical applications from other disciplines. For me, my quintessential maker moment was meeting Bree Pettis for the first time and having him explain to me that the way the printing head worked on a MakerBot, on the very first generation printer, the Cupcake, it was a superheated ballpoint pen, essentially. And that was the concept that they were going for in their execution. And so I take that kind of as a jumping off point. When we think about makers that way, we see people who bring together a breadth of hardware engineering expertise, software engineering expertise, and expertise from other disciplines, particularly design.
I mean, to me, when I think of maker, I think of a doer, a tinkerer, someone who builds for the love of building, not for any particular profit motive or because someone told them to, but because they're just enjoying it. I say this because I am one, and in the nicest of ways, but a nerd comes to mind, and I think that there's something really satisfying about putting your mind and hands to work at making something come to life that started off as just an idea. And to me, like, that is the purest expression of a maker, someone who just tries to create for the joy of creation. And it's inspiring to me.
So you talk about that, and let's build on that a second. You talk about, you're a maker, this room is filled with makers. When does a maker come to see you guys? How do they know when it's the time to come visit you and say, hey, I've got this thing? What is it that you're looking for that will foster that conversation?
I don't think there's ever a bad time, necessarily. I think venture investors, or at least, we're generally open to meeting anybody. Whether we're likely to write a check or not is a different question. I'm inspired by people who come into my office every day. I wouldn't necessarily put money behind most of them, but I learn a lot in the process. And they're different things, and it depends what your goal is to get out of that meeting. If your goal is to get feedback on, a direction that you might be able to take a product or business, that's one thing. If your goal is to raise money, then the time to walk into a room with a venture capitalist might be after you've had some time to think about what a venture capitalist really wants to hear in that meeting, and when you've had some time to think about what the business is you're building, not just what the cool product is you have to share.
From our standpoint, we're very often the founding seed investor in companies, and so we very often find ourselves meeting alone with a single founder who has a concept for a product that they have begun the process of learning how to build. And we've written some pretty big checks on that basis, to be honest. When we funded Drobo originally, it was literally on the basic designs of Jeff Barrell's new storage architecture. And that, we wrote a $2.5 million check to bring that company to life and to get the first generation of product out there in the market. So there are times when it's a sector that we're deeply committed to, it's an entrepreneur who we're a big believer in, that it all comes together, and sometimes very quickly. But we have conversations with talent that sometimes stretch over many years before it may even make sense to write a check.
So there was an interesting presentation earlier, the Go Antenna, why do I say GoPro? The Go Antenna founder really talked about her voyage, and she used the phrase money versus smart money. And I'd like to elaborate on that. A question entrepreneurs often have is, so what do you do for me as a VC other than that check? Can you, give me some color as to really what happens after you've decided to work with an entrepreneur?
It's a great question, and the relationship between an investor and an entrepreneur in many ways is similar to a marriage. It is a partnership that will last many years, perhaps longer than most modern marriages today. So I think it's really important to know who you're getting in bed with, so to speak. And a lot of entrepreneurs are eager to accept money very quickly when they're trying to raise money without really asking that question and recognizing the magnitude of the decision that they're making. I firmly believe that not all dollars are created equal. And as investors, we really pride ourselves on helping our companies in many ways, in simple ways, such as serving on boards and in a governance role and helping guide a company. In more complex ways, sometimes early on, serving an operational role, literally going into the company and working day to day alongside those people, in accessing and leveraging our networks to bring people on board. You know, for instance, if it's a healthcare company, you know, one of our venture partners is the former chair and CEO of Pfizer. So it's an individual who has a perspective that would be hard to have if you were there alone. And, you know, we take it very seriously. If we don't think we can add a lot of value to a company, then we probably shouldn't be writing a check, because that means we don't understand that space well enough or aren't well connected enough to really bring value to the table. So the best thing you can do as an entrepreneur is check references. An investor can say whatever they want, but when you get on the phone and call half of the entrepreneurs in their portfolio and ask them specifically how that firm has been helpful to them, you're going to get a very clear answer and probably a good expectation of what your experience will be like. And I don't mean to hog the mic here, but one other thing that's important is it's not necessarily just the firm, but the individuals at the firm that you're working with. And most venture firms, each partner does their own deals, and they're the one that sits on the board and has the primary interface with the company. So it's important to understand not just the firm that you're working with, but the individual that you'll be working with at that firm.
Yeah, I'd like to, as I hand it over to you, I'd love to build on that. Do you, using your marriage metaphor, do I fall in love with the firm, or do I fall in love with an individual partner, and will I actually get that partner at the end of the day?
No, you should focus on the partner more than anything, particularly in the kind of sectors that we're talking about today. Rule number one, I tell my companies and my entrepreneurs when they're out fundraising, is to target the partner that you want to work with and know why you want to work with them. Firms are, you know, they're a legal construct, a legal affiliation of partners, and firm cultures are sometimes intensely collaborative around helping a company, and sometimes they're very individualistic. You need to follow, as Zack suggested, the references and learn closely about the individual partner you're going to get. And in generally, firms are pretty straightforward about who you're going to get, and that is who you get. To come back to the central question about what we do for our companies, though, you know, let me pick off two areas where I think we've helped make a difference with some of our hardware portfolio companies over the years. We see a lot of people who have the capabilities to bring great new products to life. But taking those products and then ramping manufacturing and production is very often something that they don't have a lot of direct experience with. We have a group of VPs of operations who've worked across our hardware portfolio over the last 10 years. My favorite of these is a guy who not only does he understand component level costing right through the entire Chinese manufacturing ecosystem. So he can tell you how much money everybody's making on that resistor before you get to buy it. But he also goes, and whenever he's ramping manufacturing with a new company, he goes and he lives in the dorms, he goes and he studies the yield rates on site. He's incredibly hands-on. He's a wonderful resource, so much so that we've implanted him across a bunch of companies. The other things we really focus on, one we focus on intensely is culture. You know, since I began investing in systems companies more than 14 years ago, the whole culture around how we build hardware businesses has changed dramatically. And this conference is really sort of a manifestation of that. Today, our teams are cross-functional, they're small, they're agile, they put product in market, they test it, and they pull it out. That wasn't so true 14 years ago. We had monolithic hardware teams and software teams and QA teams and documentation teams, and before you knew it, you had 90 people building the next great box of one kind or another, a box that had probably never really seen a customer. So making sure that we're true to the values of how these companies can be built going forward is super important for us, and pushing our teams to be more agile in that respect.
Yeah, I will always tell the story. You know, one of my last startups, Klein or Sequoia, was Dash Navigation, and we like to say we spent $25 million learning that we were going to fail. And I don't think that would happen today, honestly. So something is changing. I'd like to build on that. And this room is testament to the idea that there's a hardware renaissance going on. But renaissance is a powerful word, and I'd love to understand from your guys' perspective, what do you see happening? And to your point, you're seeing something change. What is it, and what do you think it means?
It's a complex phenomenon, but I think it's a combination of a variety of factors. One is that the tools to at least reach a state of prototype are far superior and far more accessible than they've ever been. I mean, I remember the first time I saw an Arduino and started messing around with one, and went to ITP and met with Tom Igo, one of the inventors of the Arduino, and said, this is amazing, because I realized I could do that. I'd always wanted to build something, and I realized, well, wait a second, all I have to learn is a little bit of programming, and I can connect this here and buy this module, and I can make this work. I could envision how to do it. And I think tools like that, and there are many, including greater accessibility of 3D printing and others, have made it much easier to prototype ideas, which makes a big difference because it's more accessible for makers and entrepreneurs to get those ideas, and then it's easier to share them and share that vision when you have something to show for it. It's not just something on a piece of paper, but something real. It's that first step. And then at the same time, I think there are two other things at play that are really important. One is that you have success stories out there. You have examples of companies that have been built, and there are many of them today. MakerBot, Nest, the list goes on and on and on, that have inspired others. And having those shining lights of success attract more dollars, and most importantly, more people and entrepreneurs who want to start similar companies. And in some ways, it's a self-fulfilling cycle where you have great tools that are now available, great success stories where other tools get built in the building of those successes, people who come out of those companies who now have new skills and knowledge that they can apply to their next opportunity, and a whole wave of new entrepreneurs who want to build the next thing. And that's how industries get built. I mean, it's amazing, because if you looked at the 3D printing startup world 3.5, 4 years ago, there was nobody, and now I can't go 2 days without having a new company email me. It's amazing, and it's self-fulfilling. And while many of those companies will fail, some of them will go on to do great things and really change the industry for everyone. So I'm really excited about what's happening because it's inspiring, and I think there's a world, a big world that's really impactful for people that's far beyond just the little portals in our pockets and the wide screens on our walls. There's this world of stuff that really impacts people's lives, and it's exciting to see so many people waking up to that.
So I think Zach covered it well. I'll pick off two other trends that have fundamentally changed. One is the product discovery has radically changed. It's something that we all take for granted, but it is changing more and more all the time. The blogosphere is out there and ready to receive and comment on and review any new product that gets released within 24 hours and to pass judgment on that product, for better or worse. That's hugely empowering for the maker who can get it into the hands of those pundits. That begets a direct conversation with the marketplace that can rapidly accelerate your growth. And when that's coupled with the fact that today you can sell direct in every way, again, it's something really simple that we take for granted, but all of that margin that used to persist in the retail value chain can now be sidestepped. And the fact that you can go direct, other than the retail stores, MakerBot sold every MakerBot printer direct. Like, that had huge impact in terms of their margin structure and in terms of their relationship with the customer. And that sort of sets the table for
hardware innovators to get their product into the hands of end users much faster. There's a third trend, which we also, I don't think, talk enough about, which is on the manufacturing side, which is the availability of agile Asian manufacturing partners who are willing to work with companies that are doing a very small number of units because they see the potential for upside. And the ability of those partners to really grow with you over time. That's an ecosystem that has been a very powerful silent partner for all of these companies.
Let's quickly, if we can, talk about the nature of this. 5 years ago, as an entrepreneur, it would have been hard for me to raise venture for a hardware startup. Let's just be really honest. Today, it's a lot better. Is this a storm, do you think, or is this a sea change in terms of venture's perception of hardware?
Well, there's something going on broadly right now in that venture generally is in an ebullient time. There have been headlines recently about whether we are in another bubble or not. There's a lot of money flowing into the venture world and subsequently into companies. So I think on the whole, everything, whether it's hardware, software, you name it, there's just more capital flowing in today, and I don't think that will last forever. That said, I think there are enough real successes in hardware companies that this is not a passing fad, but a very real phenomenon that is likely to continue despite broader macro hiccups or cycles.
What do you think?
So I generally agree with Zach. In spite of all of the things we talked about earlier about how the model has changed, the sort of the minimum viability point for a hardware company is still greater than it is for a software company. And that will have ramifications in a downturn scenario. Those companies just are going to need more money. Now, our hardware businesses today that needed $40 million 10 years ago, that needed $15 million 5 years ago, that only need $4 to $5 million today to get viable product and market, the odds are much more in their favor than they used to be when a downturn hits, but there will still be pressure points there. And once you start to look at supply chains and inventory commitments and the lending that often goes on there, they're more complicated businesses. And therefore, they're going to be more vulnerable in a downturn. I think there is a lot of capital flowing in this direction right now. And I think it is welcome for a lot of hardware and systems investors who have discovered that they can do things in a much more agile way.
I've heard it said, and I think it's a powerful statement, that you're not really building hardware if you're doing it right. You're actually building a piece of equipment as part of a solution that's gathering very valuable data, and you're turning that data into intelligence.
We're building software companies that ship boxes, by and large. And the boxes may be very, very small, and they may not have a screen on them, but by and large, these are all software companies.
So let's talk about New York. I love being here. I'm the unabashed Silicon Valley guy here, but I'm looking forward to getting your perspective on, this is New York City. I mean, even on the West Coast, this is the big city. This is the East Coast. It's a powerhouse of creativity. What do you think this region's role is going to be in this renaissance, in the maker movement, in the hardware renaissance?
Well, Eric, I think you said it. I think the word is creativity. I think that's the theme that we actually begin with here in New York. And if you look at why it's happening in a different way here, New York includes so much talent that understands consumers, that understands design, that understands product creation across a lot of different disciplines. And that, combined with the availability of tools to build these products, is a real sea change. There's another reason, though, why it's happening here and why New York is leading. And the reality has to do with the fact that if you look at the Boston market or if you look at Silicon Valley, you have a whole heritage of systems companies that have and will continue to soak up some of the best hardware talent out there. And there are, spend 5 years in one of those environments and you will, unfortunately, I think, absorb a lot of pretty linear thinking about how hardware engineering is supposed to happen. And I think you're laughing because you talk to a lot of these people, right? They come through your door and they want to be in a place like Lemnos Labs. And that doesn't necessarily work after a certain point in time. In June, we led the Series A for a CubeSat company called Spire. And our Spire team is building a constellation of satellites to gather data on a global basis for asset tracking and weather applications. Our whole engineering team today is 27 people. It will be 40 people when it's fully grown out. That includes people who work on the actual satellites, people who are building the ground station network, the guys on the weekend who hack together a vacuum chamber for us. And they are incredibly cross-disciplined people. Those are the kind of companies that that are getting funded in this renaissance. And New York seems to have a lot of sort of cross-discipline capability.
As I pass it over to you, I'll share an example. We have a company, and it's a big trend. One of the things we're seeing is the intersection, for the first time really, of fashion and technology coming together. And in the Silicon Valley, there's a lot of literally 4 guys will walk in and pitch you on how they're going to change women's fashion. And the interesting thing is, forget the demographic mismatch there. The interesting thing is their statement that they're going to change fashion, which is rooted here and in Milan and in London. And it's the hubris of the Silicon Valley, that idea that we're going to change them. And if you talk to anybody in fashion, they're like, we've probably been doing this longer than you, and in fact, you're probably going to supply us. And it's an interesting thing. And so I think New York is in an interesting position in where it has been in some of the big businesses that technology is going to enter, but not necessarily disrupt in the way we think of it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's all about people. And I think Will and Eric covered some great examples and rationale. Silicon Valley's got some great people, and they're not going away. So they're going to catch up quick to whatever happens here, and they'll pursue things that will be successful there. But I think New York is uniquely positioned in that we do have so many disciplines here. And if you look at what's happening, there's a little bit of a drain of talent out of traditional finance industries, and all of these people want to work for startups. And guess what? There are a lot of really great and interesting hardware startups that are emerging in New York. At the same time, you have capital here. You have funds like Lux and RRE and others who have relocated from Boston or have opened up branches from Silicon Valley here in New York. So you have the complete ecosystem of talent, other companies that serve as examples and kind of training grounds for new engineers and entrepreneurs, and capital. So it's all coming together. You have a lot of media here. You have great educational hubs that are starting to get much more involved in the entrepreneurship circles. I went to Cornell, and when I found out Cornell won the Tech Campus Initiative, I was actually not that optimistic, because I had been at Cornell and I had seen all the entrepreneurial efforts on campus, and they weren't impressive. And when they decided to make the move here, they really did it right. And I've been blown away by the approach they're taking and the people they're bringing on board and how they're integrating with the ecosystem here in the community. You have offices of Google and Facebook and people being housed there. You have all these hardware incubators that are coming. It's very exciting. And if you look at a space like 3D printing, it's hard to argue that anywhere but New York is leading the way in terms of startups. I mean, you have MakerBot here, you have Shapeways here, you have Souls here, you have Normal Ears here. You have an incredible network of companies that would be hard-pressed to be matched anywhere today.
So everybody in the audience, we're going to leave time. We definitely have some time for questions, so get those queued up in your mind. I've got one last one, and it's a little whimsical, but I get to be the fairy godfather. I'm on a fairy tale theme today. Comes out of my last speech, but so I'm your fairy godfather, and with my wand, I'm gonna tap you, and you're not going to be a venture capitalist anymore, and I'm going to turn you into an entrepreneur. And when I do that, the thing I'd love to understand is what would you go build today, knowing what you know, and knowing that you've been magically freed of your VC shackles and you're now a hungry entrepreneur? What would you do? I'm going to go with you first.
I would focus on global connectivity, particularly for the developing world. I believe that we all know there are billions of people who aren't really well connected to networks yet, and we sort of tend to think about it as a problem that's there for people with Google-sized money, or billionaires, or the global telcos to go off and solve. And I don't think those groups are necessarily going to solve in a really innovative way. I think it's some combination of a constellation of CubeSats delivering a whole new standard of wireless connectivity that hasn't really been developed yet. But if you can get it that far, you can probably fund it. And if you can fund it and get even a portion of the constellation up, you know that the devices will appear at the edge. And because life at the edge is so hard right now for device makers, for mobile device makers, et cetera, the proliferation of devices will continue. It's connectivity, global connectivity, that will do more than anything to change the world. And that's a problem that I personally have a lot of passion for, and I'd like to work on, given the opportunity.
Aren't infrastructure plays a little tough to sell?
Infrastructure plays are really tough to sell, and I think part of the problem is you have to think outside of the natural constraints, the constraints of telcos and the constraints of governments. You have to say, we're going to go into this market whether we have the approval of these people or not, and you can do that with satellites.
Got it.
I'm going to give a different type of answer. And first of all, I think being an entrepreneur does not necessarily equate with raising venture capital dollars. There's nothing that says when you decide to start a company that you have to go raise money from a VC. And I'm probably shooting myself in the foot here by saying this, but I don't know if I would raise venture dollars. Because the minute you do that, there is a huge amount of pressure put on you as an entrepreneur to generate a return for those investors. And that means that you might not necessarily be able to take your business or your idea exactly where you want to, because there are all of a sudden other factors at play. And there's nothing wrong with starting a lifestyle business or a huge company that manages to bootstrap itself, which is much harder to do. But if I were an entrepreneur today, there are two things I would love to see exist. One, which I'm sure is possible, and if anybody here can help me do it, I'd love to talk to you. And the other, which is a little more whimsical, but would be, I think, just unbelievable if it existed, and I think is realistic for the future. I just don't know when. So the first is I want to reimagine body art and tattoos. It's something that's been culturally pervasive since the dawn of mankind. I'm shocked how many people I see with tattoos, and those are only the tattoos I can see. And it's been a space that has had almost no innovation, and given advances in things like light projection and photosensitive dyes, I think there are some really cool ways to change that space. And then the second idea relates to animal communicator. If you could talk to your dog, that would be pretty sweet.
Sweet, dude.
Yeah.
Well, since I have the wand, I always ask, can Aladdin give himself 3 wishes? But and maybe it's a good way to end it to say that we're makers too. Is on my electrical bench is a bunch of stuff at the intersection of connected and virtual toys. Mm-hmm. And I really believe those worlds are about ready to come together in a way that anything that your child has today is just the beginning of the adventure. I think there's an entire panel on that tomorrow called Toy Talk, but that's what I love to do when I go home. So we've got, I think, just a limited time. All right, we'll take a few questions, and then we're gonna step away, but we're gonna definitely move over to the cafeteria or something and continue the conversation. But let's take 2 questions, and then we'll take the rest outside. And that was the first hand right there, and then I saw yours.
Do you see a role for open source hardware in companies? And what do you see as potential pitfalls?
So define what you mean by open source hardware, because it means different things to different people.
Basically, instead of going through the effort of perfecting a product, and then you have one version that ships that you kind of proactively, in an open fashion, bring people together. Chris Anderson did with DIY drones.
Yep. I think that's a beautiful model, and I think we see no barrier to funding and supporting those kind of companies. So broadly speaking, we want to see businesses that are mobilizing creativity broadly, and open source communities are the best examples of that. So by all means, we'd love to see that stuff.
I think it's a great way to leverage distributed talent to build something. At some point, based on recent history, given 3DR or MakerBot, which Will can speak to much better than I can, there will be some conflict between those open source ideals and the capitalist nature of that business. And how that's resolved internally, emotionally, externally is a challenge. And you've seen it happen, and you've seen how it plays out. But the open source model gives a lot of inherent advantage early on to a company, but I think later it can cause a lot of challenges.
I have built-in bias. I used to run Java for Sun, and we went through that transition. And I'll tell you now, when I see proposals, and it's interesting, a lot of it is how it is said. Mm-hmm. When somebody comes in and we are open source, and that is the emphasis of what they're doing, that sets off some flags for me. If they talk about how they're going to use open source to build innovation, but to drive towards a longer-term model that both benefits open source and their business, that's something at least I can get excited about. But there's a balance, and I think some people lose it and almost become more religious about their open source nature. So there was a question right up there.
I'd like to understand a little bit more color on the topic of smart money. So I'd like to understand what is the level of independence and governance of the venture capital firm, and with smart money, what rate of success do you expect? How many companies do you invest in? You know, if that's smart money, how good is it?
Good question.
So I'll take the second part first, which is, you know, if how many companies we invest in. So out of our current fund, we expect to have, you know, a core portfolio, so companies that we've invested a significant amount of capital in, of between 15 and 20 companies. And part of our job is to take a lot of risk. You know, our investors who have entrusted us with their money expect a very high return. So in order to do that, you have to invest in things that are a little further out. And I think if some of our companies aren't failing, we're not doing our job because we're not taking enough risk. So I think it really varies, and it's dependent on the period of time that you're in and the types of companies that you're in. But you know, the generalized statistics in venture are a third of your companies could be total write-offs, a third could be, you know, mediocre, you know, maybe you lose a little, maybe you make a little, and one or two or three, you know, in their collective return, you know, massively overweight everything else. And that's, you know, that's really the venture model, and it always has been. It's typically one of a few companies that really matter. And I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
The first question was independence and governance. If somebody goes with a venture capital firm, do they still have full control over their company?
It really depends, and it depends on the people that you're working with and the venture firm and how they behave, and it depends on the governance structure. And ultimately, all that matters is incentives and power, really. And this is part of a negotiation process when an investor proposes terms. Part of that term sheet is always, what is the board going to look like? And is that board overweighted with investors, or is it favorable to the entrepreneurs? And oftentimes, it's very favorable to the entrepreneurs, where if the investor wants to do something and the team says no, it's not going to happen because the team's in control. But if a team has raised too much money and doesn't have any profits and is dependent upon those investors to continue their life as an ongoing entity, then guess what? They're going to be listening to those investors even if they have board control, even if the entrepreneurs have board control, because they're not going to have a choice. So it all comes down to the situation itself, and I think it all comes down to you as a person and how you want to position it and how you think through the life of a business over time.
I want to just pick up on one of the things that Zack alluded to. We're not private equity guys. We can't go buy businesses and lever them up and use that to sort of improve the value of the equity and turn a knob or a dial here on an existing company. Right? When we start as investors with an entrepreneur, we have to build something together. And guess what? Nothing gets built if the entrepreneur and the team aren't enthusiastic about doing it. You know, we have the privilege of being associated with these companies, of sitting on the boards. We have a duty, not just to the entrepreneurs and the founding team, but to the other shareholders. We have a duty to bring the best resources we can financially and in terms of all the other disciplines we've talked about up here to help grow the value of that business. And frankly, at RRE, I think we also feel it's our duty to be supportive through whatever good times and bad may come with that company. And sometimes that means working super hard to coach an entrepreneur through a wind down for something that didn't work, so that they at least feel like they've done right by their relationships with all the people who supported them along the way. There's goodwill in that, and we take a long view about these things. I know that the guys at Lux Capital do too. There are people who we've invested with who we've failed with, and we've decided we still believe in this entrepreneur, and we back them again in a new area. So there's no meaningful control in the venture capital relationship, at least that I've seen in my 15 years.
I'll echo that, and I'll end with just one example that's very specific. There was a company that we invested in that ended up not being a successful investment. The company sold, and legally and contractually, all of the existing venture investors had a right to pretty much every single dollar that was going to be returned, leaving the team with effectively nothing on paper. And if the investors wanted to enforce that, they certainly could have. But if you think about the incentives at play, right, and if you think about long-term relationships to be built, that's just not the right thing to do. So in that case, a very, very large carve-out of that capital that was owed to the investors legally and contractually was given to the team. And there were a few reasons for that. One, if the team decided to walk away because they weren't happy that they weren't going to get anything, well, guess what? We weren't going to get anything either because the deal would never get done. Right? So there's a very technical and rational reason to do that. But more important than that, this is a person we want to work with again. When they have their next idea, despite the fact that this one failed, we still thought it was a really capable person. And we want them knocking on our door first next time they start a company. And we want to make sure we do right by these people. I mean, we're all taking risks together, and I think that it's very much a partnership. If we win big together, and if we lose, we're going to lose together, and we're respectful of that.
I'd like to end it there. Again, at Lemnos Labs, I'm in a great position to help companies grow, and oftentimes we need to go and work with great venture partners, and both RRE and Lux really represent some of the best folks out there. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I think, again, we're going to step away at the end after this and find a place, and we'll continue to answer questions for everybody around the venture side of the business.
Thank you, Zach and Eric and Will. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So it's time. I know we've had an amazing day here, but it's actually an amazing New York day outside. We're going to be outside for the Innovation Showcase and some food and drink. And then we have a Print the Legend movie here at 7:30. Thanks again for a great day, and see you outside.